Like every other topic surrounding role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, game balance has been discussed over and over, and not just in the modern days of YouTube and Reddit. Check this out. Yeah. And it's like, we just keep kind of having these same conversations.
Oh no, I had the same one when Advanced Dungeons & Dragons came out. I was like, oh God, it's so like heavily nerfed. Players are so buffed and it's so easy now.
And during this conversation, we kind of stumbled into the secret for balancing combat, or at least the simplest solution that I've ever heard. Of course, we're going to consider the effectiveness of this solution over the course of this video, but in its simplest terms, the old school secret to balanced combat is that the players, not the GM, are the ones who balance every combat encounter just by reading the situation, interpreting whether or not they are likely to win, and avoiding or abandoning the fight if necessary. Now you might say, well, that's not really balancing at all, and that's why I put quotation marks around the word balance. I want to see some comments explaining how this simple solution might just be an oversimplification, but wait until we break it down, because I gotta say, I've been relying primarily on this approach to balance for my group's encounters for a couple months, and it's been really fun. So I want to share it with you because I'm Bob. This is where we learn how to have more fun playing RPGs together, and before we dive in, if you're looking for every secret to being a better game master, check out our sponsor, The Secret Art of Game Mastery. This 250-page book compiles over a century's worth of game master experience from the DM Layer team to provide not just advice, but wisdom for running better tabletop games, and not just D&D. The Secret Art of Game Mastery applies to any system and any genre, plus there are workbook templates for note-taking and game master prep, very relevant to this video, so go check it out on Kickstarter through the link below. Now, the first step toward balancing your game is defining what we mean when we say balance, because it definitely means different things to different people, especially when those people are playing different styles of games. For example, Griffith and I talked about how old school fantasy games have a somewhat paradoxical reputation of being too deadly for the player characters while also being hack and slash games of knock down door, kill orcs, find treasure. But check this out.
Well, you know, the hack and slash thing is kind of a myth too, because even though the NPCs and the monsters are considered to be, you know, they're cannon fodder theoretically, but the way the rules are designed is they have as good of odds in hurting the players as the players have in hurting them. The older play style...
You can really just cut down a whole, like, crowd of kobolds that easily, I guess, yeah.
Oh my god. Well, that's a perfect example. I had a room with 4 kobolds and they were up on this elevated thing.
We'll get back to that story in a second, but the main point is that old school games tend to be more literally balanced, such that an individual low-level player character is only about as powerful as an individual low-level monster. When you combine this 1-to-1 ratio of power with a system of leveling up based on how much gold you can claim from a dungeon, it makes a lot of sense. While the playstyle of stab first, ask questions later is often associated with this genre of TTRPGs, but that style also teaches the players that changing their tactics is an important part of their survival. Back to the clip.
And I got 4 kobolds with bows on these little balconies. I got a party of 12 characters, and I'm rolling hot as the dungeon master. I didn't kill them, but I took them all down. So many hit points. They were like, okay, end of adventure. And it was like the 3rd room into the dungeon that day.
Gotta go rest.
Yeah, they were like, okay, we're going back to town.
So if we assume that old school D&D is perfectly balanced, which it's not. Even in this game, where the stats and the dice say there's an equal probability of victory for the monsters and the adventurers as long as they're in equal-sized groups, setting up an encounter isn't that straightforward. In Griffith's story, we had a large party of PCs against a small party of kobolds, but the kobolds also had a tactical advantage that was predetermined by the game master. So this should have been a pretty fair fight, but the dice happened to be in the GM's favor, the balance was thrown off, the PCs were taking arrows left and right, but the players still had an edge. here's what happened next.
And we're going to spend a week in town recovering and getting bandages
and then strategizing for maybe buying some bows. Yeah.
Well, what they did was they found somebody that would build them this big, reinforced, it was basically like a giant plank. And they ran in there and they used it as a shield, and then they threw it on. It was like the siege of the Kobold balcony.
Awesome.
And they tilted it and they ran up.
You see, no matter how many monsters are on the grid, and no matter what other obstacles the GM places in their way, there are almost always going to be a group of players putting their heads together against one game master.
He's leaving.
No.
This means that this style of balancing a game doesn't have to be limited to old school play. Like I mentioned earlier, I've been using it for 5th edition for a while, and not only has it made my game prep a lot easier, but it's also made each encounter a little more exciting, because nobody, even me as the GM, knows exactly how it's going to end. Leaning on this principle means the GM can still try to balance an encounter if they want, but either way, the game itself is more fluidly balanced by the dice, the creativity of the players, and collaboration with the game master. That part is critical because when you encourage the players to think outside the box and outside of their character sheet in order to prevail, it's the GM's responsibility as a referee to work with the players, not giving them any answers, just arbitrating how their crazy ideas might just be crazy enough to work. This last clip really ties together how PCs should make decisions, but you'll see that one of the options doesn't work too well with superheroic fantasy D&D, so in a minute, we're going to talk about how you can still use this approach to balance in that style of game.
I finally realized, it's the players who balance the encounters. You have 3 options as rough outlines of options as a player. Okay. You can talk to the thing. Maybe the thing doesn't want to talk to you and it attacks you, or maybe you want to attack it. Okay, so you can fight the thing. Well, what if the thing is really big and mean? That's when you take option 3, which is run away.
Yeah.
And when you run away, that's when you've balanced the encounter.
You balance the encounter. You pick it. I love how simple that sounds, but I totally understand that in a super heroic fantasy game, your players probably don't want to run away. So where this old school or new school secret to balance is all about player choice during the game, super heroic balance is usually about player choice at character creation and when leveling up, and it involves either a lot of GM prep time or using computational tools to create a balanced encounter. And yes, those air quotes are still necessary because even with this seemingly objective and empirical approach to game balance, the desired end result is no more balanced than the hand-wavy old school approach. Don't get me wrong, this computational method is way more epic because the whole idea is that the player characters must fight tooth and nail with every resource and every ability at their disposal to scrape out a victory. And this makes for an incredibly rewarding combat experience for both the GM and the players because the GM knows all the time and effort they put into studying the abilities of the PCs and the monsters paid off beautifully, and running out of breath, and the players come away with a sense of satisfaction for knowing their characters well and pulling out all the stops. It is perfect for the superheroic fantasy genre that mid-level and high-level D&D 5e captures so well. But even if the GM is really good at building that type of encounter, and even if they only use it for boss battles or something, eventually the players realize that they always win. They're never captured, they never need to retreat, and Crom knows they never ever die. In other words, the party always fights and always wins. The game is rigged. And on top of that, if the players decide not to fight, then the GM can either force their diplomacy to fail or sacrifice all their prep time precisely balancing that encounter. So number 1, if the GM loves crunching those numbers, then that's awesome. And 2, if the players really can't stand the idea of their characters retreating from a fight, then this is really the correct way to play because it's more fun for that group and they should stick with it. But if one or both of those things are not true, I got a couple ideas. If you're a GM who loves superheroic fantasy but doesn't love crunching all those numbers because you would rather spend your prep time making cool magic items or fantastic locations or intriguing NPCs or factions for your game world, or if you're just too busy for any of that, the other secret is to not track monster hit points. Sounds a little wild, I know. I haven't tried this myself, but I heard it recommended by Jacob from XP to Level 3, and he made it sound like the perfect balance. Well, the perfect balance between not balancing, but still creating satisfying superheroic combat encounters. All it means is that you treat those epic boss fights more cinematically. You balance just enough to make sure the characters are going to take hits and land hits, but once the boss has gotten to use their cool ability, and most, if not all, of the PCs have gotten to use their cool abilities, you as the GM just decide that the next epic hit from a player character is going to finish the boss. That's it. And on the flip side, if the players start to lose interest because every encounter starts to feel the same, we fight, we win, we fight, we win, there are two ways to teach the players that retreating is a valid solution. First, like Griff explained, you can run a dungeon with a sleeping ancient dragon in the very first room. The first
right?
thing.
And the whole idea is the players are like, it's like, look, don't even talk to it. Go down the side of the room, find a passage, and go into the dungeon. Do not wake up the dragon or you're dead.
But again, if you want to maintain a generally more heroic vibe, the best way to teach the players that retreat is okay is to regularly have the bad guys retreat from battle. Once the first enemy in a group is killed, maybe some of the others decide this fight with some random adventurers, possibly a random encounter from their perspective, isn't worth their lives. Or if a monster just wanted to eat the characters, but now the party has beaten it down to only a few hit points, it makes way more sense for that monster to run away instead of fighting to the death. So, if any of this makes sense to you, remember to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your game group, because that stuff really does help the channel. And if you want more ideas for making D&D combat easier to run, check out this video with a couple homebrew hacks, and consider subscribing or joining our Patreon community, which is the best way to support what I do. But thank you for your support, and keep building.